news, verified facts, and current events. You're watching Our Time on Freedom. My name is Mikhail Barona. Hello. On Monday night, the Russian army attacked Ukraine, launching 251 strike UAVs of the Shahed, Gerber, Parody, and other drone types. Defenders of the Ukrainian sky shot down and suppressed with electronic warfare systems 234 drones. According to the air forces of the armed forces of Ukraine, UAV hits were recorded at 11 locations. 4 people were injured as a result of a Russian strike on Kryvyi Rih. This is the Dnipropetrovsk region. One of the victims is in very serious condition. He has a traumatic brain injury. Medics are fighting for his life. As local authorities reported, several high-rise buildings and city infrastructure were damaged. Rescuers have already extinguished the fire.
From 2 in the morning until 8:45 a.m. From 2 a.m. until 8:45 a.m., the enemy actually carried out a massive Shahed attack on our city in 3 waves. 19 Shaheds over our region were shot down by our air defense. But there were also hits. Hits occurred in 3 locations. These are infrastructure facilities. All fires, as of the present time, have been extinguished. Unfortunately, 4 people were injured, all men. 2 in moderate condition are in the hospital, 1 person is in mild condition, and unfortunately 1 person is in extremely serious condition.
2 people were injured as a result of a Russian drone attack on the Kirovohrad region. According to local authorities, private houses were damaged. Special commissions are inspecting the damaged objects and recording the damage caused. At least 4 people were injured as a result of a Russian attack on Kherson and the region. The victims have blast and traumatic brain injuries, as well as various other wounds. The occupiers struck with drones. In particular, a Molniya UAV hit the center of Kherson. Residential buildings were destroyed. The resulting fire was promptly extinguished by rescuers. Also this morning, the Russian army attacked Druzhkivka. This is already the Donetsk region. 8 aerial bombs hit different areas of a city. 2 people were injured. This was reported by the State Emergency Service of Ukraine. As a result of the strikes, a fire broke out in an administrative building and an industrial zone. Rescuers extinguished it, but due to the threat of repeated shelling, units were forced to temporarily suspend work. The defense forces of Ukraine thwarted attempt at a large-scale spring-summer offensive by the army of the Russian Federation. This was reported by the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrskyi. The general emphasized that the occupiers planned the main strike on the Pokrovsk and Oleksandrivka directions, as well as on the Kostiantynivka, Ocheretine, Lyman, and Kupian sectors of the front. The defense forces were ready for an increase in the intensity of Russian assaults, so in certain directions, the armed forces not only hold positions, but have also seized the initiative and are conducting a counteroffensive.
In several directions, the enemy's offensive actions have been successfully halted. In some areas, high-intensity fighting continues. The occupiers are trying to bring in new units and are preparing to continue their attacks. The Russian military command has thrown tens of thousands of soldiers into so-called meat assaults. However, the cost of this offensive attempt has been catastrophic for the aggressor. In the last week alone, the enemy's total losses amounted to nearly 8,710 people. Oleksandr Syrskyi, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Facebook.
134 combat engagements were recorded on the front over the past 24 hours. As reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, in the Kramatorsk direction, Russian occupiers unsuccessfully tried to break through Ukrainian defenses 3 times. Defense forces repelled 4 enemy attacks each in the Kupiansk and Lyman sectors, 5 each in the South Slobozhansky and Oleksandrivsky sectors, and 7 more in the Slavyansk sector. 12 Russian assaults were repelled at the Kostiantynivka bridgehead, 15 in the Huliaipol sector, and 29 in the Pokrovsk sector. According to military experts, the enemy is suffering colossal losses every day.
We see that the start of this campaign, the beginning of this stage of offensive actions by the forces of the Russian Federation, has likely become, by our modest estimates, the bloodiest for the Russian occupiers since the start of the full-scale invasion in 2022. In terms of losses and resource expenditures that have not justified themselves. Probably the most difficult period during the full-scale invasion, because today the Russians have indeed lost over 8,000 personnel in just a few days, according to conservative estimates.
970 Russian military personnel were eliminated by the Ukrainian Defense Forces in the past 24 hours alone. Thus, the total losses of the Russian army since the start of the full-scale war have already exceeded 1,288,000 soldiers. Also, yesterday, the armed forces of Ukraine destroyed a Russian tank, 5 armored vehicles, 24 artillery systems, 1 MLRS, and 136 units of enemy automotive and special equipment. And they also shot down nearly 2,000 Russian UAVs. On the night of March 23rd, the Ukrainian Defense Forces struck important fuel and energy infrastructure facilities of the Russian Federation. In particular, Russia's largest oil port on the Baltic, Transneft's Port Primorsk in the Leningrad region, was hit, as well as an oil refinery in the Republic of Bashkortostan. As emphasized by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, these facilities provide oil refining, storage, and transportation of fuel and lubricants used for the needs of the occupying army.
According to preliminary information, both the tank farm and the oil loading infrastructure of Transneft's Port Primorsk were hit. A fire is confirmed on the facility's grounds. About 60 million tons of oil pass through the Port of Primorsk annually. In addition, a fire is also confirmed at the Bashneft Ufa Neftekhim site. This refinery is located at a significant distance from the Ukrainian border, which is about 1,400 kilometers. The extent of the damage is being clarified. From a report by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine on Telegram.
The main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine called for limiting the aggressor's access to modern technologies. They established that on March 16th, the Russian army attacked Kyiv with a Lancet-type drone. But it was upgraded with autonomous guidance elements, specifically using artificial intelligence modules. After studying the UAV wreckage, the main intelligence directorate identified 62 electronic components, most of which are of foreign origin, primarily from the US, as well as Switzerland and China.
Despite sanctions, Russia maintains access to critical technologies and continues to improve its own weaponry. Even technological products like modules for AI-based solutions remain accessible to them. The technologies used against Ukraine today pose a potential threat to other regions of the world as well. The publication of such data is intended to help increase sanction pressure and limit the aggressor's access to modern technologies. The main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine on Telegram.
Germany will fund the production of 15,000 Ukrainian Strela interceptor drones, which will be handed over to National Guard units. As reported by the German embassy in Ukraine, the funds were allocated under a recently signed multi-million-dollar agreement. It also provides for the training of National Guard units, logistics, and the further development of unmanned systems. I'll also note that the Strela interceptor drone is designed to hit fast and maneuverable aerial targets, specifically Shahed-type combat UAVs. The Netherlands will be the first in NATO to use drones in all combat units of the army. This was announced by the commander-in-chief of the country's armed forces. As early as April, the Dutch army will begin recruiting those wishing to train in drone operations. They will then be integrated into various units of the armed forces. The Netherlands decided to introduce UAVs into the army after analyzing combat operations in Ukraine and the Middle East, where drones play a crucial role. Ukraine and the United States of America have made progress on a number of issues during negotiations in Florida. This was reported by the Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, Rustem Umerov. Over the past weekend, delegations discussed a reliable security system for Ukraine and humanitarian aspects, as well as prisoner exchanges with the Russian side.
We continued discussing key issues and further steps within the framework of the negotiation track. Special attention was paid to aligning approaches for further progress and practical results. We thank the United States for its active participation and consistent work in advancing this process. Rustem Umerov, Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, on Telegram.
The United States has announced progress in the peace negotiations for Ukraine. According to U.S. Presidential Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, the delegations managed to significantly narrow the range of key disagreements. Washington notes that the very fact of dialogue between the parties is already an important step forward.
Recent discussions have focused on narrowing the scope and resolving remaining issues to steadily move toward a comprehensive peace agreement. We sincerely welcome the ongoing engagement to resolve outstanding issues, recognizing its vital importance for international peace and broader global stability. Steve Witkoff, Special Representative of the U.S. President on social network X.
In turn, President Volodymyr Zelensky, after a report from the Ukrainian negotiating team, stated that prisoner exchanges between Ukraine and Russia are possible in the near future. The Ukrainian head of state also noted that it is necessary to continue doing everything possible to achieve a just and reliable peace.
It is important that the aggressor receives no reward for this war. And it is important that we are not all forced to return to war in months or years. That is, so that security guarantees for Ukraine and all of Europe are sufficient for peace, for a reliable peace. I expect that after our negotiating group returns to Ukraine, we'll discuss in detail all aspects of the meetings, which cannot yet be safely discussed by phone. There are signals that a continuation of exchanges is possible, and that would be truly good news and confirmation that diplomacy is working. We hope that this will work out. Overall, the situation remains quite transparent. Putin does not want to end the war. But the main thing the world desires is that we all together must do everything possible, and will continue to do everything possible to end this war.